Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. In today's episode, I am going to be walking you through the steps on how to make these lidded, pumpkin-inspired containers. I'll be using the coil method for the body of the piece and the slab method for the top lid. Now, I'm not going to do a full demo on how to do the coil section because I have made a couple other videos. I'll link those in the description so you can check those out. So this demo is going to really concentrate on how to attach all of this texture and then how to also apply the lid. But before we get to any of that, let's talk about the texture. I'll show you some tools that I have and things that you can go to try and find some texture. I love to find any random object that will give me some decent texture. These first items, some of these are sold as texture tools that you can find at the craft stores for clay, and some of them are mats that are used in baking, and they're really similar. These double-sided ones I got at Michael's for clay use, and then these one-sided ones I found on the internet that were designed for cake decorating. There's really not much difference, and I've used both of these types very easily. Once you've committed to making those tools for use on clay, you do not want to go back to using them for your cooking or baking. I also was able to find these little stamp type things, and I have tons of these in different profiles. This was sold for working in fondant or for cake decorating. So these guys here are a little bit more rigid. They don't flex like those mats. Do really work for working in ceramics, but it's a little bit harder to remove the clay without losing some of the texture. So you just want to keep that in mind depending on the type of clay you're using, but this is also an option. These little silicone mat molds that were pre-made, these I also found for the baking department, and this has sweater texture pattern. I actually love these. When you use these on clay, it looks like it has that illusion of this fabric sweater feeling on the piece that you're making. There's something really lovely about having this really hard, rigid form of a ceramic thing once it goes through the firing, but having such a soft, comfy texture. But again, these also are much more flexible. They're made out of silicone and are sold and marketed for the purpose of cake decorating. This guy here is a hot mat. It had some really cool, interesting texture. It's a pot holder, you know, for reaching in the oven and making sure you don't burn your hands. This I found at Marshall's or Tuesday Morning, one of those home good places. I've seen them at Target. I found some very similar to this coasters made out of the same stuff at Target, and it was like a 4-pack of different coasters for like $1 or something. So, you know, anything, like I said, that I can find that has that same quality that I will pick up and add to my stash full of things. This guy here is a brush cleaning mat I found on clearance in the beauty section, probably Marshall's. It had this really cool texture, and it's there for cleaning your makeup brushes. I couldn't resist all of this different types of pattern that it had on it, and I want to say it was probably around $2. In with your cake decorating, you can find these little rollers that have various different profiles, and you just roll them along the clay and it creates that pattern. So these I paid, I think, $1 a piece for from on the internet. I also am a woodworker, so I used to do a lot of commission work where people wanted recycled and reclaimed materials. And along the way, I found a place that also sold random parts from buildings. So this was actually an old molding, and they used to, even though it's made out of this rubbery stuff, would get tacked onto a building somewhere, and so I collected that because it had this nice texture that I could smack some clay onto and get. This, I have no idea what it was, but it was broken off of something, and I got like a whole bag full of this stuff for like under $10. I'm guessing this was some kind of knob of something, but this makes a really amazing bark texture. It's actually made out of resin. I just kind of roll it on the clay and it gives me this bark texture. You could totally use a wire brush to do that, or even a really roughed up piece of wood that has splintering on it. That would totally work too. This I found at the 99-cent store. It was in one of those like throw a bunch of decorative balls in a bowl and stick it on your coffee table, that kind of thing. I have some regular steel wool that you use for cleaning, you know, this stuff is used cleaning your pots and pans. Some old knobs. At that same place I was able to find these like different profile broken knobs of things, And I actually went ahead and made some little clay molds out of these by just pressing these into little bits of clay, firing them up, and then I ended up with little molds. So you could do that too, but I mean, these were just all broken little pieces of knobs that had texture that I was able to get. Handles. Potpourri. I love buying and looking for potpourri. When I was on the East Coast, we only had a certain number of type of seed pods available, your typical domestic stuff that you'd find. When I moved to this coast, there's like a ton of different types of seed pods that were here. But before that, you know, I didn't have access to those things. Bags of potpourri are really great because you can buy these things that have all these pods that they get that lend itself to really great texture, and you don't have to go hunting. Pine cones work great for that too. You know, whatever you can find that looks like it might create good texture. I mean, the bottom of your shoe, pretty much anything you can find. So the first thing you need to determine is what you're going to use to create your texture. And if you are doing a smaller piece like this pumpkin that I'm going to be working on, I would recommend that you stick with only a couple of textures. Don't go crazy and use like everything in the box. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to stick with these two pattern mats. I'm going to show you how to create pieces that can get attached to your lantern. I went ahead and I made my vessel using the coil method. And if you'd like to check out how to go ahead and do a simple vessel, please check the link in the description. But then I also added one extra coil just to the inside rim here. And that is so that I can go ahead and put in a little bit of a collar around this for my lid to sit and kind of just not knock around. I wrapped it up and let it set overnight so that it would be stiff enough for me to go ahead and create that rim. So before I go nuts with creating all kinds of texture on this thing, I'm going to show you how to go ahead and attach that little extra piece there. I'm just going to roll a fairly thin coil, well, thinner than what I've been using. And I'm going to slip and score this. And I'm going to stay right here on the inside of opening here. Apply my slip. I needed to wait for this to firm up in order for me to put this weight on it because I didn't want it to kind of sink in on itself, so that's why I set this up. And normally I don't do this, but I'm going to get a clean cut here so that when I start and stop it, it will be nice and clean. And then I'm going to go ahead and blend that right into the inside. I'm not too concerned about what it looks like when I do the blending because I'm going to clean it up in a minute. But you do want to make sure that you get it connected well. It's a little hard to see, but I'm just pulling little bits of that coil and blending it into the base there. And then I'm just going to run my finger along the inside, get it a little bit cleaned up in the inside part. And now I'm going to ensure that I blend really well here on the outside. As I'm blending, I'm going to be shaping as well. So I'm going to take the blunt end of my fettling knife and I'm going to just kind of scoop chunks of it down and blend. I'm creating a little bit of a platform here. I actually can take the back end of my fettling knife and just come in. Give me a nice smooth. Run my finger under there, make sure I don't have any rough edges. Sometimes I will take a board and kind of tap it around the top just to get an even surface. I'm not going to do that right at this moment because it's not that bad. Also, I have no idea where a board is. I'm going to stop fussing with that. If I do too much messing with it, it might make it vulnerable because I did just add it on. The next step is a fairly easy step. Take a small chunk of my fresh clay from the bag, and roll a little ball, and then I'm going to find somewhere to press it into on one of my mats, and we'll go for this flower right here. I'm going to press it into here, peel it off. I should have that pattern. Then I'm going to go ahead and score. And then you could actually just score the whole thing right now and get it all scored up so that it's ready to go. All right, you got this scored with its pattern on it. You're gonna apply your slip smack it on there. And now you can either take a chopstick or whatever you can find. I'm gonna use the tip of my fettling knife, and it's cool to experiment with different things. Sometimes I get those little wooden coffee stirrers. Just gonna smush the edges. And what you're doing is, as you're smushing, going to start creating a textured pattern all around it. And then you're building up an additional layer of patterning by using the tip of the fettling knife or stick or whatever you're using to create this. You're also joining these two pieces together, so it's basically a 2-for-1 here. And then you can go ahead and continue to just work this process. This is why I recommended not doing too many crazy patterns. Usually I'll just stick with 2 or 3 different ones on here and just keep repeating them all over, because if you do too many, it doesn't really look cohesive. I don't know. And again, when you're done doing all of this kind of crazy texture all over the whole thing, you're gonna wanna make sure you wrap it up, because these are an add-on piece, so it does need to stay wrapped up overnight to make sure that these get a good and strong connection. Now I have this little smaller area, so I'm gonna go in for a smaller piece. I'm trying to keep these fairly thin because my walls were already thick to begin with, and I don't want to go adding too much clay, otherwise it puts me in that danger risk of this being too thick. So you want to keep that in mind when you're doing this. And I don't want to be up here near this rim because I'm going to put the top on, so let me cut that away. When the two pieces come together, you want to make sure you're making a nice transition. So it's going to take me some time to get that texture on there, but before I complete the whole thing, let's move on to showing you how to make a lid for this thing. I have this bowl here, and it sort of fits, and which is good enough for me for the moment. If you don't have anything that you could use as a cap like that, you could always just ball up some newspaper, take that balled newspaper, wrap it in a little bit of masking tape or blue tape, and then use that as the form. So I will cover this in some newspaper though, just to be sure that it releases properly. I'm gonna just take some I'm gonna set these two aside, and I'm gonna roll a slab. Scraps are getting a little high here. Don't put any clay down the sink. If you're going to want to recycle your clay, keep it in another bag and rehydrate it and wedge it. That's a different tutorial. I'm gonna just go ahead and roll out a slab that's gonna fit around this piece. I did a full tutorial on how to roll out a slab, so if you want to check out that, I'll link that also in the description. I'm just gonna do this quickly. Take a chunk here. And for good measure, now that I've got it nice and even, I am gonna just give it a little toss. That ought to do it. All right, now I'm gonna form this around here. I'm just gonna eyeball the cut just to take off some of the excess. I'm gonna leave a little bit of rim so that I have some room to play with when I get to the fitting part. Now this can be set aside on a board somewhere. Since I'm running low on boards, running low on boards in a wood shop, go figure. I'm gonna just use this one, pop that here, and I'm gonna set this outside in the sun because it is sunny right now for about 10 or 15 minutes while I continue on adding this texture. And when I peeled this off of the table, some of it stuck and gave me this crazy texture, which I think I wanna use. So I'm gonna leave that. And now that I mangled it all to hell, I gotta fix that rim again. Okay, at this point I think I'm gonna wanna not handle it as much because the more I keep picking it up, the more I risk knocking it out of its shape. I have a turntable I think I'm gonna grab and set it on. If you don't have a turntable, it's fine. Your board should spin just fine on its own as long as you are working with the piece directly on something. Someone should really clean up around here. Now I can't see it. I hope you can see it, and I hope it looks good. Oh. Okay, I'm gonna carry on with adding all of this texture, and I'll be back here. By that time, the lid should be set up enough for us to go ahead and add those details on. I've got all of my texture on here, and I'm gonna start fitting this lid, but I'm gonna do a little bit of cleanup on my rim. I'm gonna come in with my loop tool, and I'm just gonna clean this up a bit. I'm gonna do that in the opposite direction too, in a downward. I'm not gonna go too crazy about the stuff that's falling in. When it fires up, it's not gonna stick, so I'll just let it sit in there and I can shake it out later. All right, I'm gonna take my fettling knife and come in and do the same to the top, just to level it off a little bit. This clay has a lot of grog in it, and grog is, you know, already fired little bits of clay that's ground up and stuck in here. And that can become problematic when using the turning method with the trimming. It's a little uneven, but I'm gonna live with it. Move on to getting that lid fitted. It's pretty stiff now because it's been setting out in that sun. And so I'm just gonna eyeball where I want it. It fits pretty nicely without having to do too much work here. It's not going anywhere. I don't really have much trimming to do as far as the inside go. If this wasn't such a good fit, I'd probably go in, take my ribbon tool, carve away the inside to get it really fitted, but it's resting nicely here, and I'm okay with that. As much as I like the uneven organic thing happening, I think it's a little bit too large for this shape in the bottom here. So I'm gonna do a little bit of trimming. I'm gonna get it back on this bowl though. All right, so I'm gonna come in and I'm just eyeballing a little bit more to trim off. I'm not being particular, but I don't want it to be fully round. I just wanna get rid of some of it. Let's use the wire brush, because the wire brush is really common to find. In fact, I bought mine from the 99-cent store. It's a really cool looking texture. So here I have just your basic wire brush from the 99-cent store. I'm going to use that to texture up the rim of this. And I'm leaving that texture that when I peeled it off, so I like having some of that. And I'm just going to jazz up this edge of it. Another thing I like doing with this wire brush is I like taking it and stabbing at the edge. I'm gonna do that. Just make sure you don't smack yourself on the hand. It is still a wire brush. And if this is uncomfortable, you can kind of work it with the bowl on or flip it the other way, whatever works. No pumpkin is complete without some kind of stem of some sort. So let's get on that. I think we'll just make a very simplistic stem, something a little more traditional. I'm just taking a chunk of wet clay here. I'm gonna make a tapered coil, so I am leaving the back end fat and kind of rolling out this end a little bit thinner. And then I'm gonna smack that down. Now I'm gonna break the rule here with it being way too thick, right? Because this is thicker than this handle over here. So what I'm gonna do to alleviate some of that is take my loop tool. Now I'm gonna carve out some of that handle. But I can't go just taking this little bit here and smacking it on top of there, because if I do that, I will have created a giant air pocket. I also need to cut a hole in here to make sure that the air can kind of flow through there. In putting this lid on top, it looks like it creates a full-on chamber. It actually doesn't, because this is not attached to it, so in the kiln, air can escape where the lid meets the base, but this would once I seal this on here. So I'm gonna go ahead and take out a little tiny circle here, and this will be visible if you do pick up the lid. So I wanna make sure that it doesn't look too jacked up. And I'm going to be scoring, and I don't want to go too crazy where this is going to sit. I want to retain that texture and be careful where I'm scoring. And then before I go smacking that on, let's do some texturing. Let's go to town using that wire tool. That's right, 99-cent store, the best clay tool you will find. All right, smack some of that slip on. And blend away. All right, and there she is. That is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already, and I hope to see you soon.